Good afternoon, church. It's great to connect with you on this Wednesday as we're in our midweek Bible study. And we are looking at key passages in the Bible and working through the prophets. We are in Daniel right now, and this is Daniel part 2. Last week, we looked at chapters 1 through 3, the first part of the early years of Daniel. And this week, we'll look at chapters 4 through 6, which are the latter parts of the life of Daniel. And then next couple of weeks, we'll look at the rest of the book, which is the prophecies that Daniel writes down. So today, let's begin in prayer as we look at Daniel. And I've titled today, Daniel, a Man of Integrity. Daniel, a Man of Integrity. And Lord, we just come before you today, and we ask, Lord, that you teach us the lessons that you have for us today from Daniel, that we'd be able to understand and see how you work in our lives and work in the life of others. And Lord, how you even can break through the hardest of hearts to bring what your purpose in their lives. And we ask, Lord, for this class today, and that you would just teach us and help us to see you more clearly. I ask this in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. So Daniel chapter 4, very interesting here. It begins Nebuchadnezzar the king. So what we see here right now is this isn't Daniel writing, this is Nebuchadnezzar writing. So kind of writing his story. And here in the book of Daniel, we have actually King Nebuchadnezzar writing a chapter in the Bible. And if you find the oddest things, you think of Nebuchadnezzar wrote a chapter in the Bible. Yes, he did. And it's his testimony of his, in a sense, what I believe is his conversion and his coming to the Lord. We knew, and we talked about Nebuchadnezzar last week and talked about how the man of great temper. And when he got mad, he burned people to death. He wanted to destroy their homes and turn it to dust and kill everybody. And so he was a very violent man, conqueror, a king. And the Lord uses Daniel and his friends, of course, to come close to Nebuchadnezzar and begin to show him step by step the power of God. And finally, God in this chapter shows his power in his life, how God is stronger than his pride, than his will, than who he is, and breaks Nebuchadnezzar. And in this brokenness, he remakes him and restores him. So let's see what chapter 4 has for us here as we begin. Nebuchadnezzar the king, to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. Peace be multiplied to you. In a sense, still, all the earth is all his kingdom, the things he's conquered. I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. And you see here, it's Nebuchadnezzar talking about what God has done in his life. How great are his signs and how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. See what a difference from the previous chapter. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to become, and remember the dream he had of the head of gold and then silver and then bronze. And then he goes in the next chapter and does the whole statue of gold and saying, I don't want these next kingdoms. I want me to be the whole kingdom. No, but here he says God is the one whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. So we see a change here. And so Nebuchadnezzar begins, I was at rest in my house, flourishing in my palace, and he has a dream, another dream. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts of my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore, I issued a decree to bring all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. The magicians and the astrologers, the Chaldeans and soothsayers came, and I told them the dream, but they did not know what to make me its interpretation. Sounds very familiar to chapter 2. But we see here Daniel is now part of that. And so Daniel came before me. His name is Belshazzar, according to the name of my God. In him is the spirit of the holy God. So the spirit of God is in him. So he calls him Daniel. And I told the dream before him, saying, Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy God is in you, and no secret troubles you, explain to me the visions of my dream that I might have seen and its interpretation. So he begins to tell him the dream. These are the visions of my head while I was in my bed. I was looking, behold, a tree in the midst of the earth. Its height was great. The tree grew and became strong. Its height reached the heavens. It could be seen to all the ends of the earth. And its leaves were lovely, its fruit abundant, and it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it. The birds of the heaven dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. I saw in the vision of my head while I was on the bed, there was a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and cut off its branches, strip off its leaves, scatter its fruit, let the beasts get out from under it and the birds from its branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump and the roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze. Let all the tender grass in the field, let it be wet with the dew of the heaven, and let him graze there with the beasts. Let him graze with the beasts on the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from that of a man, and let him be given a heart of a beast. Let it 7 times pass over him. This decision is by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, gives it to whomever he will, and sets over it the lowest of men. Then this dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now you, Belteshazzar, declare its interpretation, since all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation, but you are able, for the spirit of the holy God is in you. So there is the dream. And Daniel, when he hears this dream, it says here in verse 19, he was astonished. His thoughts troubled him. And the king spoke to him, said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its interpretation trouble you. And Daniel answers, my lord, may the dream concern those who hate you, and its interpretation concern your enemies. But unfortunately, they don't know. So the tree you saw, which grew great and became strong, whose height reached the heavens, and which could be seen in all the earth, whose leaves were lovely and its fruit abundant, and the food was for all. The tree is you, verse 22, O king. You've grown and become strong, for your greatness has grown and reaches to the heavens, and your dominion to the end of the earth. And inasmuch the watcher, the Holy One, coming down from heaven, said, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump and roots in the earth, and bound with a band of iron and bronze and tender grass in the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven. This interpretation, O king, verse 24, and its decree of the Most High, which has come upon the Lord the king, means that they shall drive you from men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make you eat grass like oxen. And they shall wet you with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules over the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. So basically, the dream begins about a tree, and the tree is Nebuchadnezzar, and then the tree is cut down and bound, and the tree becomes, in a sense, Nebuchadnezzar as an animal with the beasts of the field, and for 7 years, in a sense. And it says, inasmuch as they have given the command to leave the stump and root, your kingdom shall be assured. The kingdom will be protected after you come to know the heaven rules. But the whole purpose, in a sense, of this dream is that you may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. And it's interesting, it says here at the very end of Nebuchadnezzar, this is verse 17. The Most High rules the kingdom of men, gives it to whomever he will, and sets it over the lowest of men. So in a sense, breaking down Nebuchadnezzar of his pride and recognizing that this kingdom was given to him by God, and as the lowest of men. And so Daniel in verse 27 gives him advice. He said, therefore, king, let my advice be acceptable. You break off your sins by being righteous, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps there may be a lengthening of your prosperity. So be good, be good, Nebuchadnezzar, be good. Give to the poor. Stop being proud. Maybe you get a little more time. But Daniel, realizes, this is going to happen, and so maybe it can be lengthened. Maybe you can have a little more time before it comes, but this is going to happen. And fortunately, it does happen, because we see that the end result is Nebuchadnezzar's pride being broken. So all this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar at the end of the 12 months. He was walking in the royal palace of Babylon, so a year later. And so maybe he was good for a year. And he spoke and he looked at this whole palace and everything. And you had to remember at this time, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world at that time. Babylon must have been quite a place, beautiful place in all its splendor. And he comes and he looks over Babylon, and their pride kind of comes up. Is not this Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty, my mighty power, my majesty? And it says, while the word was still on his mouth, it was just coming out of his mouth, a voice came from heaven. King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you, and they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. You shall make you eat grass like oxen. 7 times shall pass over you till you know the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. At the very hour the word was fulfilled concerning Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men, ate grass like oxen. His body was wet in the dew of heaven till his hair had grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws. So he became like an animal since his sanity was taken from him. And people have gotten, there's this kind of a disease where you kind of believe you're becoming an animal. Basically, not that remember it says here, his hair had grown like eagle's feathers, his nails like bird's claws. Basically, maybe he didn't let anybody get near him. And after a while, his nails grew out and his hair got all like dreadlocks and stuff. And he was acting like an animal. And basically at that time, what they would have done, they would have wanted to hide this. So they probably kept him in a place where people could not see what had happened to Nebuchadnezzar. And then the whole bureaucracy of the kingdom just kept running during that time while Nebuchadnezzar was going through this breaking of himself, becoming an animal. But the Lord broke him. The Lord brought this upon him, and people are trying to explain this or that. But the idea is here what the Lord did. The Lord broke this king, who he had used to break the kingdom of Judah and to bring his justice on him. But the Lord broke this king, and something that really amazes me is, and to think about it, you think of the Lord came after Nebuchadnezzar to break him and to bring him to him. So that the tool, because he was a tool of the Lord to bring judgment on Judah, became not only a tool, but one that the Lord wanted to restore to him. So he used Daniel and brought Daniel in there and blessed Daniel. He made Daniel the second in command of the kingdom, and blessed Daniel, but he made Daniel a blessing so he could give testimony and share with Nebuchadnezzar and those in the kingdom the glory of God. And we see not only Daniel is blessed, Daniel's friends, as we looked at last week, are blessed. They receive the blessing of the Lord, but it's not so that they can just be blessed, it's so that they can show and share with others the blessings of the Lord. And so Nebuchadnezzar was a recipient of these, and Nebuchadnezzar wrote, to all the kingdom that the God of Daniel is the only true God. And at that moment, he believed it in his head, but his heart was still strong in himself. But later, when he is broken here, we see his sanity returns, but in a sense, he becomes more sane than he was before. And Nebuchadnezzar praises God and ends the chapter saying, at the end of this time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven. I lifted my eyes, and see that in a sense, that vertical relationship with him. I lifted my eyes to heaven and recognized the Lord, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High. I praise and honor him who lives forever. So he brought a blessing to the Lord. I recognize the hand of God in my life. I recognize that I am nothing before him. He says, dominion is everlasting. Dominion is kingdom from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, including himself. He does according to his will with the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth, no one can restrain his hands or say to him, what have you done? At the same time, the reason returned to me, the glory of my kingdom, the honor of my splendor returned to me, my counselors and nobles resorted to me. I was restored the kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the kingdom of heaven, all whose works are true, and his ways are justice, and all who walk in pride he is able to put down. So here we have a lesson from Nebuchadnezzar, who was broken in his pride and who recognized in the end that pride comes before fall, but at the same time recognized that God is that God of heaven who restores and renews and makes new. And I just find this in the book of Daniel just a beautiful picture of the Lord's mercy. Even on this bloodthirsty ruler, that he brings people into his life and brings circumstances into his life to break him and to bring him back, and then he restores him the kingdom. One of the things we see historically, this is not something we see very much of or proclaimed, of course, because it's not something they would want to get out. But we do see in the kingdom that there is this 7-year period during the time when there was not much happening in Babylon. And it seemed like a quiet time, like nothing was, no wars, no conquests, no, just kind of just stability, just kind of not much happening. And then at the end of that 7 years, we see once again a lot of things begin to happening there at the end of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So, and we see Nebuchadnezzar is restored the kingdom, and majesty is given to him. So now that he recognizes where it comes from, he's given more majesty. And so we see, and I do believe we'll see Nebuchadnezzar in heaven and get to greet him, and that'll be something I look forward to, among others, to see who are there. Of course, we all want to see the Lord, and that's who we want to honor and praise. But being and knowing that the Lord is merciful even to people like Nebuchadnezzar. So it's something just a blessing to see here. So in a sense, what we're in these 3 chapters we're going to look at, we're going to see 3 different rulers. The good, doesn't quite work. The good, the bad, and the ugly. What the good, the bad, and the good. So we'll see Nebuchadnezzar, but we'll see right now that also in these 3 chapters that Daniel, in this old age, is one of the leaders or co-rulers or leaders in these kingdoms. He is the leader here in Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. And later on, we see here at the end of his life, he's going to have been put aside in the next kingdom by Belshazzar. And we see that this is just years later, near the end of Daniel's life. Daniel's now an old man in his 80s, older man in his 80s. And here we see in Daniel chapter 5, Belshazzar. Now let's look really quick here. I want to look at the timeline. So we have Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's father, Nebuchadnezzar, and then we have a few others between Belshazzar. We have a few other quick, and there were some other kings here. At the end of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, of course, there's always chaos after a strong ruler, people trying to take that control. But finally, it's not really Belshazzar, it's his dad, Nabonidus. Nabonidus actually conquers or takes the place of these small rulers and takes over the kingdom. But the interesting part is, and you'll see that reflected in this chapter we look at, Nabonidus, this is near the end of the fall of Babylon when Cyrus and Persia is rising. We see that next kingdom, and we'll see the next week the kingdom of the silver and the next kingdom that comes after Babylon. Nabonidus is actually off in he leaves Belshazzar in charge of Babylon. He's off in Arabia and other places, conquering and just doing so. It becomes like a co-ruler. We have Nabonidus as the ruler and Belshazzar as the co-ruler, and we'll see how that is reflected in the chapter in just a minute. So Belshazzar is the son. And he's the one that's in Babylon, taking and controlling the kingdom from there. So Belshazzar, this is also picking up when Cyrus is actually at the gates. Cyrus is Persia is conquering, so Nabonidus is fighting somewhere else, and Belshazzar is holed up inside of Babylon with the army of Cyrus outside. And interesting enough, in the midst of war, what does Belshazzar do? Is a little bit of his character. So he makes a feast. So they're inside Babylon, and there's an army outside of them, and so he decides, hey, instead of preparing for war, let's make a feast. Let's party all night. I know we have the army outside, but well, might as well go out with a bang. So Belshazzar made a great feast for thousands of his lords and drank wine in the presence of the thousands. While he tasted wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple, which had been in Jerusalem, and that the kings and his lords and wives and concubines might drink for them. So when it says here his father Nebuchadnezzar, really was not his father, but they were related. But the idea is that they always went back to the greatest of the kings. So their father, we are followers in kings of Nebuchadnezzar. Remember David, like their father David. Well, they might be a grandson or great-grandson, but they were in the line of David. David was that great king. And so they referred always back to David. Here in Babylon, they all referred back to Nebuchadnezzar, the great conqueror. So they was their father. And so he brought these implements from the temple of God. They had stored away. It's like, let's bring them out. I don't know if he knew exactly that these were the implements from the temple of God. Maybe they were. There is in the Jewish histories, it is said that Belshazzar was persecuting the Jews. So maybe he thought this was a way to insult the Jews, to bring out the things that had been taken from their temple. But he brought them out, and they began to drink from them. And they drank wine and praised the gods of silver, verse 4, and of bronze and of iron and wood and stone. So they began to praise the God with these implements. And then something happens. In the middle of all this, the fingers of a man appeared, in a sense, almost like this, just as a disembodied hand coming out, and wrote on the wall. You can just imagine seeing the hand. Opposite the lampstand, the plaster wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. So they all became white. Imagine just seeing this floating hand that is writing on the wall. And it's funny how it describes this, because it says his thoughts troubled him, and the joints of his hips were loosened, and his knees knocked together. He was very, very, very afraid. And the king cried aloud to bring the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers. And the king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and he shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. And here's that part. The third ruler. Why the third ruler? Well, Nabonidus, his dad, Belshazzar, and then the third one, whoever interprets this. So we see that's the one of the pictures we see here. Why the third is because he couldn't be the second, because Belshazzar was already the second. So the wise men came in, verse 8. They could not read the writing. They could not make known its interpretation. He was very greatly troubled. And then the queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. And this is probably like the queen mother, in a sense, or someone who knew of Daniel. The queen spoke and saying, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, or nor let your countenance change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom the spirit is the spirit of the holy God. And in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, the king, made him chief of the magicians and astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. Inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding, interpreting dreams and solving of riddles and explaining enigmas was found in Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will give an interpretation. So basically what we see here is Daniel's been retired. Daniel's no longer in control. He's retired somewhere, and the king doesn't know him anymore, because I guess when they had all those little kings in succession, Daniel was kind of put in the background. But the queen, or the queen mother, some think, because of her background and knowing, being probably in the palace when Daniel was there, maybe in her younger days, knew of Daniel had heard and seen the things that Daniel did. So he says, "Hey, did you have Daniel? He's here. He's kind of retired. You got to go find him in the retirement home, Babylonian retirement home, but he's there. So bring him in." So they bring Daniel in, and Daniel is brought before the king. The king spoke to Daniel and said, "Are you that Daniel? Are you that Daniel? You know, the one I heard stories about with captives of Judah, whom my father, the king, brought from Judah? I've heard of you." "Ah, yeah, I heard of you. I thought you were dead," kind of thing. That the Spirit of God is in you, the light of understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. And see, these wise men and astrologers they've tried to bring, they can't read the writing or make known its interpretation of this thing. Now I've heard of you, and that you can give the interpretation and explain enigmas. So if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Daniel, as I can see as an older man, he's like, king, with his young whippersnapper. Who do you think he is? He's not even, this tall compared to Nebuchadnezzar, his great grandfather. So anyway, but Daniel says, let your gifts be for yourselves and give your rewards to another. But I will read to you the writing of the king and make known to you its interpretation. And so he begins to speak. "O king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar, your father, a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. And because of the majesty that he gave him, and all the peoples and nations and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up. Whomever he wished, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened in his pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling like that of wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses." Nebuchadnezzar did this. It's almost like Daniel saying, when in my days, when I was young, the kingdom was really a kingdom. Yeah, not like it is now in your time. No, not exactly. But he's kind of reminding him, Nebuchadnezzar went through all this, and he recognized that the kingdom of God rules over the kingdom of man and appoints whomever he chooses. And he says, but now, you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart. Although you knew all this, you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords and your wives and concubine have drunk for them. So maybe he did do it in a sense on purpose. Maybe there was that persecution of the Jews. And you praise the gods of silver, gold, and bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear, and the God who holds your breath. And notice, I love this. The God who holds your breath. God holds our breath in his hands and owns all your ways, you have not glorified. So this is what the message says. The fingers on the hand were sent from him, and this is what was written. It says, the inscription, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. And this is the meaning of each word, Mene. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Your kingdom is done. Tekel, you have weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perished, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. And then the Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with the cloth with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be a third ruler in the kingdom. So not good news. Your kingdom's over. You've been found wanting, and today it's going to be given to the Medes and to the Persians. And that is exactly what happens that very night. Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. And it's very interesting. The Babylonians were actually sitting behind the walls of Babylon, thinking, we're safe, nothing can happen to us here. That's why he's having a party. And what Cyrus does is because the river Euphrates ran underneath into the city, what he does is he actually diverts the river. And as he diverts the river, the waterway dries up, and his army is able to come into the city and catch everybody unawares. And basically, it's a very much, in a sense, almost, I'm sure it's not bloodless, but Babylon was conquered very easily because everybody in Babylon was partying, was thinking everything was good, there's no trouble. And then in this very, ingenious way, they make it underneath the city and are able to come in and infiltrate the city before anybody knows what's happening. And in one evening, one night, the city is conquered. And it says here the kingdom was divided. See, in that moment, Babylon fell. The rest of and Persia took over that part of the kingdom, and then continued conquering the rest. But where Belshazzar's father was still fighting. But that was the beginning of the fall of Babylon. And that very night, like the prophet Daniel said, your kingdom would be taken away and be given to another. Now, interestingly enough, he gives him the robe and everything. He doesn't really do much. You're gonna be third in the kingdom for what? 5 minutes. You got about 5 minutes before the Medes and the Persians come in. But he became, I guess, the third in the kingdom for a short time, even though Daniel didn't want to. And so we see there the fall of Babylon, and the Lord had actually proclaimed that Babylon would fall, and they would and we see Jeremiah and Isaiah saying, Babylon was lifted up as a instrument, but in the end, Babylon will fall, and that they will be judged for what they did to Judah and to Jerusalem. So they fell. And now a new kingdom is installed. And very interestingly, we see here, and this is why I named today Daniel a man of integrity. I mean, it's not very often that in a new kingdom, a new power, a new leadership, you have people from the old kingdom being raised to high positions of power. But we see here that it happens. And here we see also the Medes and the Persians. So we have Cyrus and we have Darius. In a sense, working together. Darius the Mede, Cyrus the Persian. And we see here in Babylon, Darius is the one, and I said Cyrus a minute ago, but Darius is the one that comes in and takes over Babylon. So Darius sets over the kingdom in Babylon, 120 satraps, already, taking control and putting people over governor. And over those, he put 3 governors, so the satraps and the governors. And Daniel was one of those top 3. So Daniel is given, in a sense, a position there of power, 3 governors, and all the satraps gave, the ones in his, though he overseed, gave account to them. So the king would not suffer loss. But see, Daniel quickly distinguished himself above the governors and the satraps because there was an excellent spirit in him. And the king was thinking of setting him over the whole realm. So putting over, in a sense, okay, we had the 3 governors and the satraps. Let's put him up here so he can oversee these 3 who oversee these, all these over here. And so Daniel has distinguished himself. But imagine this. Daniel is, in a sense, for them, a foreigner. He's not a Mede. He's not a Persian. He's a Jew. And he was like very famous and one of the leaders in Babylon, the kingdom that had been conquered. And so, I mean, there must have been a lot of, politics going on. But the reason is, why was Daniel chosen? And probably the fame of Daniel, I'm sure that the stories of that last night with Belshazzar got out to the conquerors. Oh yeah, we knew you guys were going to win because Daniel prophesied, or Daniel read this prophecy. It said that very night, Belshazzar would be killed, and he explained the whole thing. And so, the story of what Daniel had said, or actually interpreted, and then the other stories of Daniel probably grew. So when Darius comes in, he says, "This man is a man of integrity, a man of power, and who better to put in and have as one of our regents, in a sense, of over the kingdom." So we saw this. Why? Because verse 3 says, because there was an excellent spirit in him. There was an excellent spirit in him, a spirit of, and we see, of integrity, as we see who Daniel was. So we became, at the beginning of last week, we saw Daniel purposed in his heart. That was the first one. He had that purpose. I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to follow the Lord no matter what. And we saw that in his life and his friend's life. And here at the end of life, we see the result of that purpose in his heart is a life of integrity, a life where he has an excellent spirit in him, and people can find really nothing bad about him, and we'll see that here. So the satraps didn't like that. So in verse 4, the governors and the satraps tried to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But it says, but they could not find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. So we see there that integrity, nothing. They looked for any dirt they could find, anything. I mean, they looked and could find no dirt, nothing to pin against him. So they said, we won't find any charge against Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. The one thing we don't know is that Daniel is faithful to his God. So the way we get in, the way we go against Daniel is setting him up where he has to choose between serving his God and serving the king. And that's what they did. So they went to the king and deceitfully said, hey, King Darius, live forever. And they started stroking his pride and said, we've consulted and we want to make a royal statute to deliver a firm decree that nobody can pray to any god or man for 30 days except you. So we'll have a 30-day party about how great you are. And so everybody will have to pray to you and to thank you because you are the great one who delivered us Babylon. And the king, and if they do this, if they don't do this, they'll be cast in the lion's den. So king, please establish the decree and sign it so that it cannot be changed according to law of Medes and Persians, which does not alter. And see, when we find out in the system of law of the Medes and Persians, and this is actually, if we see historically, that was one of the things they were famous for, and which really helped their kingdom be established. It said the king could not alter it. It wasn't the whim of the king. And one day thinks this and does this, the next day he does that. It actually could not be changed. We see this here in Daniel. We also see it in the book of Esther. The law of the kings of the Medes and Persians cannot be altered. So Darius said, in his pride, said, "Oh, sounds good. Worship me for, 30 days. Why not?" So he signs the written decree. So now Daniel has to choose. And the people are waiting and seeing, and they're observing. So Daniel knew what the writing was signed. What did he do? He went to his home, went to his room, and opened his windows towards Jerusalem, and he knelt down on his knees 3 times a day, where he always did. He did exactly the same thing he always did. He didn't change his routine. He didn't for that day, okay, for next 30 days, I'm going to close my curtains so nobody sees me. No. He says, I'm going to do what I always do. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to dishonor God or try to hide. So he prayed and gave thanks before God, as was his custom since his early days. Ever since he purposed in his heart, Daniel continued faithfully. And we see now Daniel is a man of integrity. So the men assembled and said, aha, we got him. We knew it. They knew. They counted on Daniel's integrity before his God. And so they went before the king and spoke. Didn't you sign a decree? Didn't you say that this would happen? Oh, yeah, I did. I did sign it. The king answered, well, we got one. Daniel, who was one of the captives from Judah. And they always say that when the captives from Judah, it could have been 80, almost, probably about 60 years since he'd been a captive from Judah, did not show regard to you, O king, for the decree that you have signed. So they didn't say Daniel, the governor. No, Daniel, the captive from Judah, kind of slighting his name. But he prays to his God 3 times a day. When the king heard these words, he was displeased with himself. He's like, why did I do this? Why did I sign this? And he tried to deliver Daniel, tried to find any way to deliver him, looking for laws and loopholes, and nothing could be found because he signed it as a law of the Medes and Persians. And so the king said, even you, king, cannot hide. And this is, so we see this. Even the king himself cannot hide or break the law of the Medes and the Persians. So no decree or statute the king established may be changed. So you got to think about what you established. When the king gave the command, they brought Daniel and they cast him in the den of lions. The king spoke to Daniel saying, your God whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. So the king knew something about Daniel's God. And so Daniel probably had shared with him, and he's seen and he heard the stories. So he heard and he knew about it, but he hadn't seen the power of God, Daniel's God. But he prayed, that would happen. So a stone was brought in and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his signet ring, basically saying no one can violate this seal, so that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. So nobody could come and rescue him, or nobody could do something and try to, hurt him more. I don't know. Well, he's thrown the lions, and that was hurt enough. So the king goes in his palace and says he spent the night fasting, praying. No musicians were brought. He wasn't able to sleep well. Rose the next morning and wait. Okay, the purpose was complete. He came to the den and cried out with a lamenting voice, and we see here probably expecting the worst. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Daniel, a servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually?" And once again, we see Daniel's reflecting who he is. The king knew this and saw you're continually talking about your God, serving your God. Was he able to deliver you from the lions? And then a voice spoke, "Daniel, O king, live forever. My God sent his angels and shut the lion's mouth, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, king, I have done no wrong before you. I've been a man of integrity. And because of that integrity, the Lord saved me." So once again, we see God blessing Daniel. And that blessing is not so he can keep it. It's so he can share it with others. He shares the king, "My God saved me." And his glory is proclaimed. The king sees the hand of God and the power of God. They take him out of the den, and no injury was found on him. And they kind of searched Daniel. Are you sure? No scratches, nothing? Because he believed in God. And so we see now Darius responds, and we see Daniel is blessed, and then he becomes a blessing to others because Darius writes a proclamation. We've seen these. Nebuchadnezzar wrote a few, and now Darius does. And the king gave to command. He brought those men who had accused Daniel, and he cast them in the lion's den, and their children and their wives. And that's the rulers back then. They were nothing except thorough and malicious many times. And the lions overpowered them and broke their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. So their mouths were shut, and now their mouths were open. And then King Darius writes this: "To all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth." Remember, dwell on the earth is all the Persian Empire. "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is a living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed. His dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions." So we see he recognizes the greatness of of God, and proclaims it out to the whole nations. Everybody receives it. Oh, Daniel's God, the God of Daniel is the living God. So we see there the God of power. And we see Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And we see Daniel prospering, becoming, in a sense, that second in command there in Babylon, and prospering during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And here the history of Daniel ends. This is at the end of Daniel's life. In the next 6 chapters, we see dreams that Daniel has at different periods of time during his life. And so the dreams and visions of Daniel are kind of a part 2 to the book of Daniel. So part 1, the history, kind of chronologically, and then part 2, we go backwards again and we see different dreams, and we'll see how those fit in next week. But what a blessing to see a man of integrity, a life of integrity, and be able to proclaim in the highest courts of the land the glory of God, and that God puts him in these positions of power so that under Nebuchadnezzar, and later, Belshazzar for a few minutes, and now Darius, he becomes, and Cyrus, he becomes powerful in 2 different kingdoms, which is something that is not heard of. The power, but it's not something that he sought. It's something the Lord gave him because he was a man of integrity before him. He had purposed in his heart to follow God. So blessing to see that one who honors the Lord, and we see the reward, and the reward not only for himself, the blessings, but that through his life, as he is blessed, he's able to be a blessing to others. And we see the lives he touched, the lives his friends. He influenced his three friends, so they became steadfast and followed the Lord. And when there was their time of trial, they said, we're gonna honor God, and even if He doesn't save us, we're going to honor Him. And they got thrown in the fiery furnace. We see him influencing Nebuchadnezzar, having a hard case there, and being part of that, breaking Nebuchadnezzar. And then we see him here influencing and being a testimony to Darius, another ruler, with that same bloodthirsty edge as Nebuchadnezzar, or thoroughness in their eyes, I guess. But we see him really beginning that speaking to him, and so many other people that are not named, that were influenced because Daniel's daily living for the Lord, daily purposing in his heart to follow Him, and the influence he had. So it's a call for us as Christians: purpose in our hearts to follow God no matter what, and then live a life of integrity before others, so that people, when they look at us, I can't find any dirt on them, because they keep doing and honoring God. The only thing I can find dirt on is or the only thing I can find against them is the way that they honor their God. And so that's the only thing. And if that can be said of us, what a blessing. What a blessing. May that be our goal. May that be our purpose, that we would be like Daniel, men and women of integrity. May the Lord bless you and keep you this week, and continue following the Lord. Amen.